Good evening. My name is Russell Roberts. I'm the pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Seymour, and tonight I am recording this brief sermon summary because due to technical problems this morning, our live stream message was not recorded and it did not stream properly. And so I'm recording this as a replacement to that video. In today's message, we will continue our discussion of spiritual gifts. Last Sunday, we learned that spiritual gifts are of no personal or lasting benefit apart from love. God's selfless and sacrificial love should be the spring from which all Christian service flows. It is the source which gives our individual gifts significance and makes them more effective and productive. Even after our spiritual gifts are no longer necessary, God's unfailing love will endure. I've titled this morning's sermon, Prophecy in Tongues. It comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 1 through 19. This message is the 23rd message in our series through the Corinthian letters. If you have unanswered questions about the practice of speaking in tongues, like some of the people in Corinth did, then listen closely to this morning's message on what the Bible has to say about this important topic. Our first point this morning is called Edify the Church. 1 Corinthians 14, verses 1 through 5. Having just completed a long discourse on the excellence of love, Paul urged the Corinthians to pursue love as the motivation of their spiritual gifts and service. Then he began an extended comparison of the gifts of prophecy versus speaking in tongues. Apparently, the Corinthian church had an excessive fascination with the gift and practice of tongues. It seemingly played a prominent role in their corporate gatherings. Paul stated that they should be more focused on and have an increased desire for the gift of prophecy instead. Paul explained that the person who speaks in tongues is often communicating directly with God, and those who are listening often do not understand the mysterious things that are being said. On the other hand, those who prophesy speak to people who understand their words and are encouraged or challenged or perhaps consoled by them. In other words, the person who speaks in tongues edifies himself, while the person who prophesies edifies the church. Now, Paul was not trying to minimize or dismiss the gift of tongues. In fact, he wished that all the Corinthians were able to speak in tongues. However, his greater desire was that they prophesy. Why? Because prophecy benefits the entire church, while speaking in tongues generally doesn't, unless the tongues are interpreted and understood by everyone who hears them. The principle here is that our spiritual gifts are best used to edify the body, not just the individual member. The second point this morning is called Deliver Understandable Content, and it focuses on verses 6 through 12. Paul stated that tongues were profitable to the church when used to communicate God's revelations, His knowledge, His prophetic utterances, and our teachings. In other words, speaking in tongues is a means of communicating, while prophecy is a form of content being communicated. There's a difference. Proclaiming, hearing, and heeding the message of God is more critical than being fixated on the manner by which it is delivered. For example, anyone can blow a flute or pluck a harp to make noise. However, it takes skill to actually play melodies on a musical instrument. Likewise, anyone can blare the sound of a bugle, but only those who know and can sound the proper signal can warn people to prepare for battle. The point is that the sound that is being produced needs to have meaning. It needs to be understandable. It needs to convey a message in some way. In the same way, speech that is communicated through the gift of tongues should be clear and it should be known. All the world has many languages, but none of these languages are useful apart from meaning. Paul wrote that those who speak in an unknown language are perceived as barbarians by those who listen to them. Likewise, audiences who don't understand the language being spoken are perceived as barbarians by the speaker. Without meaningful communication, neither party benefits. The content of the message cannot be properly relayed or received unless the speech is comprehensible. And that is the critical element. Such is necessary for the edification of the church. The third and final point is use your mind. Verses 13 through 19. In light of everything that Paul has been teaching, he instructed those who spoke in tongues to pray that they might also be able to interpret. This would enable them to make sense out of their tongues so that others could understand and thereby benefit from their speech and what God was saying through them through the miraculous use of their tongues. Again, this highlights the importance of corporate edification. Paul explained that those who pray in indiscernible tongues are praying in the Spirit, yes, but they're not praying in the mind. And he expressed his strong desire to pray and sing, for that matter, with both mind and spirit. The expressions of those who bless or give thanks to the Lord in spirit only, that is, through unknown tongues, cannot be shared by those who do not possess the appropriate spiritual giftedness to interpret those tongues. There cannot be a corporate worship. In such a scenario, their prayers may be edifying to themselves to some extent, but they are not edifying to others. Paul revealed that he spoke in more tongues than any of the Corinthians. He had personally experienced and had a great appreciation for the gift of tongues. Nevertheless, he concluded that he would rather speak 5 words of instruction that could be understood by others with the mind than 10,000 words in an unknown tongue that no one could understand with their mind. The point is that we should worship and serve and utilize our spiritual gifts with both mind and spirit. Mindless worship is unfruitful, and it can even be dangerous. Many practices of the New Age movement and other similar type religions encourage out-of-body type experiences in worship. They seek to achieve trance-like or even ecstatic states as a means of connecting with or communing with God. They minimize conscious, intellectual, and thoughtful worship, while highlighting hyper-emotional and near, if not completely hypnotic worship. They emphasize worshiping in the spirit, but neglect worshiping in the mind, and such practices and efforts are not biblical. In conclusion, many Baptists, including myself, are cessationists. We believe that certain of the spiritual gifts, categorized as the miraculous gifts or the sensational gifts, or sometimes even called the sign gifts, which include the gift of miracles, healings, speaking in tongues, and interpreting tongues, which we've focused on today, cessationists believe these particular spiritual gifts have ceased. They are no longer bestowed to individual Christians as they were during the apostolic age. While we certainly believe that God can and still does frequently do these miracles in our world today, we hold that He no longer gifts individuals with the supernatural ability to perform these miraculous signs in a regular or ongoing type way. When the space shuttle or rocket takes off, boosters are necessary to lift it up out of the atmosphere. But once it escapes Earth's gravitational pull, these boosters are no longer needed, and so they are jettisoned. In the same way, the miraculous gifts, such as speaking in tongues, were necessary in the first century to authenticate and give credibility to the apostles during the infancy and the establishment of the Christian church. But once the church was firmly planted and had taken root, these gifts ceased, as did the office of apostleship, by the way. And their cessation is consistent with Paul's previous teaching that all spiritual gifts will cease at some point. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 8. In closing, going back to today's message, what God actually says is more important or deserves more attention than the manner by which he says it, even if that manner is sensational. Beloved, it is misguided to place more emphasis on the performing of signs and wonders than on thoughtful obedience to the clearly understood truths of God. Jesus chastised the people in his day for this same type of misplaced fascination. Matthew chapter 12, verses 38 and 39. Beyond the obvious and surface level contrast of prophecy and tongues we see in this opening half of chapter 14, this passage also teaches us a deeper lesson on the proper use of all spiritual gifts. Our gifts should be used in a way that engages the mind, that is comprehensible or understandable or discernible to others, and above all, that edifies the church as a whole. Thank you for listening. May God bless you.